Hi, hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and today we are talking about all of the books that I read in both March and April. I feel like I say this almost all the time, and then I end up just being wrong over and over again, but this is probably going to be a shorter video just because we only have 9 books to get through, and that might make it sound like I haven't been reading very much, but actually, not pictured in this video are the 20 books that I read for the video. I feel like I've made the mistake of hyping up too much to my audience because I've been working on it for so long that I've mentioned it a few times. That's coming out, by the way, probably 2 or 3 days after I post this, but I didn't want to wait to post my wrap up until it was unfashionably the middle of May, so I swapped these videos. But the long national nightmare is over. I'm finally free of that project, and I'm honestly pretty proud of it. But also just pretend I didn't mention it, okay? Just let it slide into your feed in a couple of days and take it as it is, not as something that I have accidentally been hyping up too much. Anyways, I read 20 books for it, but they're not real full-length books, you know? This won't make any sense until you see the video, but it was only the equivalent of 3 to 4 actual, I think, books worth of content. So yeah, in addition to the 9 books that we're talking about today, I also read those, and then I also read 15 volumes of Yona of the Dawn to cope with that project over the course of the past few months. So I actually have been reading. I feel like I've kind of been on my grind. But yeah, 9 books to get through. If this is your first time watching one of my wrap-ups, I try pretty hard not to spoil anything by my standards for spoilers, which are things that you can't discover either from the back of the book or from reading the first 50 to 100 pages. I mean, obviously I talk about my feelings on the books, I talk about my opinions, I give you my take on who I think would enjoy it. So your exact mileage may vary based on what you are able to deduce from those things, but my goal in these videos is always just to connect the right people to the right books. Even the books I think are kind of bad, I won't spoil for you because I do think that those books have an audience out there that is just, it's not me. But before we actually get started, I just have a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month. I adore Book of the Month. I've worked with them a whole bunch of times. I'm actually talking about, I think, 2 Book of the Month books later in this video. But if you have no idea who they are or what they do, let me tell you. Book of the Month is a subscription service where once a month they send you this list of about 5 or 6 of the most exciting new releases that are coming out that month. They have what I would like to believe is just a little army of tiny taste-making ants that just swarm all of the new books that are coming out every month and pick out the best ones for us. All that you have to do is just pick out a book from that list and then they ship it directly to your door in hardcover. And also, if none of them speak to you that month, then you can always just skip. It's completely risk-free. This month, I got 2. I got Alive Day, which in the tradition of me enjoying extremely sad and tragic, but also ultimately uplifting stories, this is a memoir about a woman whose husband was sent back from military service with a really debilitating physical injury. And during his subsequent recovery at home, things start to go wrong. And this book is obviously pretty serious. It's about things like the failures of the American healthcare system and bureaucracy and addiction. And I don't think I ever would have heard of it if it hadn't been for Book of the Month. So this is number 1 and complete tonal shifts for the second book. But I also threw in Silver Elite, which I've started to hear a lot about online. It just came out. This edition actually has sprayed edges, which is a first for me with Book of the Month, but I think that they look good. I feel like they have nice subtlety. Silver Elite is a dystopian romance story that I've heard is really similar to an aged up Divergent, a statement that I find fascinating because I too was a teenager in the 2010s. I feel like this is the next book that a lot of people are going to be talking about, and you know me, I'm nosy. I like having opinions. But if you are interested in either of these 2 books or just in Book of the Month in general, you can sign up using the link in my description alongside code BOUQUET to get your very first book for only $5 and also an extremely cute and stylish hat in your box as well if you sign up this May. Thank you so much again to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. I really appreciate it. Let's get back to it. Hello, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed a safe voyage with my ad. The first 3 books that we have to talk about today, genuinely looking at them in the stack, it doesn't feel real that those are a part of this wrap up. To me, right now, looking at these books, it feels like this came out in the Paleolithic era of my life. But it was really only 2 months ago that Oathbound finally dropped at Barnes & Noble. And right at the beginning of March, leading up to release, I reread Legendborn and Bloodmarked. And since this is book 3 out of 4 for the entire series, I'm obviously going to talk about this book pretty specifically, but let me give you my rundown on what, in general, Legendborn is about. Legendborn follows a girl named Bree Matthews, who is a student at UNC Chapel Hill as a part of their, early college program. So she's still 16, it's still a young adult book, but she is on campus at a university. And right after she was accepted into this program, her mom passed away under what Bree has discovered to be extremely mysterious circumstances. And for reasons, once she gets to UNC, she ends up getting swept into the activities of this, extremely old, turbo white, very deep south secret society. And the entire purpose of this secret society, and also one of the main magic systems of this book, is that many, 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 many years ago, during the theoretical time of King Arthur, when he and his knights and Merlin were all fighting a holy war against demons, King Arthur and his boys ended up barely eking out the W, but it wasn't a sustainable thing. Like, there would be other demons in the future. So Merlin casts a spell that makes it so that King Arthur's spirit, and also the spirits of all of his 12 knights, will pass down through their descendants. And it's kind of like a form of reincarnation, but the descendants are still their own people, like whichever part of the line has the magical powers at that time. They're just kind of influenced by the temperaments of whatever knight they are descended from. And also, and most importantly, they have access to whatever their knight's magical powers were, because each of the 13 knights of the table all had their own magic powers that, again, are passed down through the generations to one descendant at a time. Merlin also passes down his powers to his descendants, who are just all collectively called Merlins. The basic idea is just whatever 13 descendants are active at any given time can work together with the Merlins to fight back against the demons and keep the world safe. And that's just kind of what's been happening in all of the generations since this all happened. And we're finally back to UNC, but the secret society there basically just exists to house and train and serve as a gathering place for all of these descendants of King Arthur, because their powers are only active when they're like in their late teens, early 20s. So Bree gets involved with the secret society on like day one of college, when she accidentally witnesses some things that she was definitely not supposed to witness. And during this entire event, she ends up getting a strong impression that the people inside of this secret society might have had something to do with that mysterious death of her mother that happened a few months ago. So that's where we start off. Important context, if you somehow have been following me on this platform for any amount of time and don't know, I am a legendborn stan. I am a legendborn defender. Not like it really needs my defense, because the response to the series is pretty universally positive. And when I think about why I still read YA as a 24-year-old woman, despite the fact that I'm definitely not in the target audience anymore, and a lot of the common tropes and narrative arcs just don't really hit the same way as they did when I was like 14 and reading things for the first time, there are still plenty of authors who can take those tropes, who can take those cores of nostalgia and reinvent them and do these really important and cool and unique things, even in a genre where if you hit a string of bad luck, it can really start to feel like you've read everything before. And the Legendborn series, to me, is like the peak of that mountain. It's like the platonic ideal of what I want a young adult series to be. It takes a lot of those common tropes. It's got sort of a group chosen one thing going on. It's got a main character with a dead parent who died under mysterious circumstances. It's got an academic setting where, yeah, you're taking classes, but low-key, you're also kind of studying magic at the secret society at the same time. It's got a love triangle inside of it where I actually don't hate either of the men. It has a lot of these things that definitely feel in a vacuum like they've been done before, but in Legendborn, in this series, I cannot emphasize to you enough how fresh this feels, how unique this feels. And a lot of that comes down to the plot direction. The twists and the turns inside of this series, I don't know, man, maybe I'm stupid, maybe there's somebody out there who saw everything coming, but I never saw really any of the major twists coming at any point. These are both 5-star books for me. Again, I absolutely love this series. I think it's fantastic, but Oathbound, I say as if I'm about to make this out to be like a massive disappointment. Oathbound, I only gave 4.5 stars for reasons that I will now attempt to explain to you while telling you as little as humanly possible about what actually happens. From the jump, I also want to admit that me even giving this a 4.5 is probably inflated just because of how much I love these characters and I love this series, and I was just so excited to figure out what would happen because, I mean, book 1 came out, I think, in 2020. Bloodmarked, I believe, was like end of 2022, beginning of 2023, and this one just came out now. And I've been following this series basically since release, so it's been a while. I've been waiting to see where we would go from the cliffhanger at the end of book 2 for at least a couple of years. And if I'm being real and frank with you, I feel like to an extent, anything would have fed me. Just having more lore, having more content, having, again, more time with these characters that I've grown to love so much, I was almost certainly going to like this book. But the other reason why I feel like my rating might be a little bit inflated is also tied into the problems I had with this book, which is that I just have a tremendous amount of faith in the author of this series, Tracy Deonn, to finish things in a way that is amazing, in a way that's really, really cool, because this book is pretty long. It's like 650 pages, and especially compared to books 1 and 2, there's not a lot of events. Like, there's not a ton happening. The book is really just consequences. It's Bree and the rest of the cast dealing with the fallout of everything that happens at the end of book 2, which was fucking insane. Like, there's a reason why I was rabid for this. But because of that, this book is really just about putting irons into the fire. It's about sowing the seeds, so that way the finale can be a harvest the likes of which we have never seen before. for. A generational reaping of what has been sown. And you really only get in the end here one tiny taste of what you hope the payoff will be in the finale. And if I end up hating it, if I end up thinking it doesn't come together in the way that I am trusting Tracy to bring it together, then I think my opinion of this book would go down retrospectively. But based on the much more self-contained narratives of books 1 and 2, I have a lot of faith it's going to get there. We also get the addition of multiple POVs, which did not exist in the first 2 books. It makes sense, I mean, with where the story is, like you probably had to really see everything that was going on. But despite the fact that we're getting those multiple POVs, it's almost sadder then that there are some side characters that were really, really important who kind of get sidelined and like furloughed from relevancy for 500 pages just to get rehired in the back 15%. And I feel like it meant that there were a few emotional moments and reveals in the last little bit that just didn't have the same impact that they would have if we'd seen a bit more of those characters. If you think you know who I'm talking about, you're probably right. There are 2 options and it's both of the obvious options. That's who I mean. But despite that being one of my bigger qualms about this book, I feel like at this point I am just so beyond invested in Bree's journey, in her like emotional growth and trials and tribulations, that I'm willing to put up with a lot. And it's off the back of me just wanting this girl to get a single fucking break, just a single second to breathe and to relax. I also really liked, as a side note, one of the side characters that was introduced in Bree's chapters. One of my favorite character archetypes. I feel like the series desperately needed a girl like her to kind of foil Bree. But yeah, anyways, I hope that any of that made sense. I do think this is the weakest entry in the series so far, but again, it's in service of the harvest of a lifetime. When we finally get it in like 2 or 3 years, I'll be locked in. Okay, I'm buckled up. Right after I finished with Oathbound, I was like petrified I would end up in a reading slump. So I immediately went to stop the bleeding with this book. And other than Bloodmarked and Legendborn, which don't really count because I had read those in the past, this book actually ended up being my first 5-star book of the year. And that is First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. This book follows a woman named Lucy, who is a single mom, but not in the way that you would typically expect. We'll get to that later. And the beginning of this book is directly inspired by the very beginning of Sleepless in Seattle, although the rest of the book is quite different. Lucy is just living her life. She's a mechanic. She has a wonderful daughter until one night she gets out of bed and she ends up catching Maya, who is I think like 12 or 13, so older than the son in the original movie. But she catches her on the phone with the host of a radio show that is basically just a dating and relationship advice hotline. And Maya had called them to get some dating advice for her mom because she's like worried that her mom is lonely, which obviously not the thing that you want to hear when you're Maya's mom and you're just trying to like act natural and be happy. Lucy ends up taking the phone away from Maya and like finishing out this conversation kind of about what she's looking for with love and what she hopes is just out in the world for her. And as luck would have it, this conversation ends up going viral. And it turns out that before that call happened, the show had really not been doing well, mostly because Aiden himself, the host, he kind of just lost his optimism. Like he's become incredibly jaded after listening to call after call of people who are just really lonely or depressed or they're in awful relationships or they're evil. And it's hard to host a show about love if you yourself do not really believe in love. Long story short, shenanigans ensue and his producer calls Lucy and begs her to become a recurring guest on the show. So that way they can do a segment a couple of days a week called Lucy's Search for Love, where in theory, through the power of like audience participation and random callers, Lucy will find her true love live on air. And yeah, she says yes. Lucy and Aiden start taping the show together a couple of times a week and like bantering with random audience members. And obviously, because they are the 2 named characters on the back of the book, it turns out that maybe the love story is actually not between Lucy and a random stranger from the audience after all. Maybe it's between Lucy and the man that she now has to spend a bunch of hours in forced proximity with all of the time constantly. It has been a while since I've liked a romance book this much, at least since Check and Mate early last year. But even with that book, I remember having a few problems, especially with the ending, so I didn't give it 5 stars. But because my taste is so particular, because my bar is kind of high, it is genuinely such a fantastic feeling to read something that reminds me why I love love stories, why I love watching people fall for each other. And this book just really did it for me. It's not my favorite thing that I've ever read in my entire life, but it had almost no problems. Like there was nothing that DQ'd it. And I had such a fantastic time when I was reading it that I got to the end of the book, I closed it, and I was like, I have no choice. It's 5 stars. There's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. And a lot of the romances I like because of the way that they handle complex themes, like grief and dealing with trauma and growing up and growing together with a partner. And this book doesn't really have that. It's in the other bucket that is much smaller of romances that I love purely because they're really fun and I think they would adapt fantastically to film. They're just quintessential romantic comedy vibes. That's that's what this is. A lot of the criticism I've seen about this book has revolved around the man, Aiden, and especially around the fact that his internal conflict kind of made him act in ways that were like disproportionately bad and frustrating in comparison to what was actually going on. And to that, I say, I get why you would think that, but also you kind of just don't get him like I do. And I feel like partially the critique comes from a place of so many modern romance novel protagonists having like 17 abusive relationships and also dead parents, and also they were like a war refugee inside of their backstory. And it's like, dude, not everything has to be that serious. Most people in your life who kind of suck a little bit in some way, who are kind of annoying, they probably kind of suck because they've been through something on the level that Aiden has gone through. I don't think that you're a bad person if the worst thing to happen to you in your life had bad impacts on you long term and like fucked with your little still mushy teenage brain when it was happening. I feel like our feelings grow to fit our circumstances. And if that was the part of his life that had the biggest impact on him, of course it's going to cause problems as an adult. I don't think it's healthy to just be like, just get over it. Stop talking about this man the way that you talk about yourself. Yes, it could have been worse, but his feelings are still valid. And obviously that doesn't give him an excuse to hurt people. That doesn't give him an excuse not to work through it. But I don't think he's like a bad guy or that he's unrealistic just because it feels a little bit disproportionate. I feel like all people have at some point in their life disproportionate responses to the things that happen to them because it's about more than just the things that happen to you, you know? And like, honestly, I kind of appreciated that neither of these characters were dealing with internal conflict and trauma that was so deep and complex that it would be impossible to believe that they would just be able to get over it by the end of the book and be together. Forget Me Not by Julie Soto was a fantastic example of that, where it's just you have these two characters who have truly diametrically opposed problems going on in their lives, and then through the profound magic of them just banging for 200 pages and talking about their feelings like twice, everything is just solved and dealt with, and they're healed now, and they can just be happy together for the rest of their lives, apparently. I personally, when I read romance, find couples like that extremely difficult to root for when we're not like seeing them evolve, we're not seeing them grow, we're not seeing them do the work, and their problems are so severe. But with this book, they have problems that are real, but they're totally things that you can just work out. And it was just really easy for me to root for them as a couple throughout this entire book. The book is not exactly slow burn, but there is a lot of yearning just between the two of them with the circumstances of the show and the fact that she's supposed to be looking for love, presumably off the show being what they are. It's like such a ridiculous situation. And the side characters in particular in this book, I thought were fantastic. I really loved Lucy's background, which I alluded earlier is not like your typical single mom. And the reason for that is the father of her child is just her best friend from high school who ended up coming out as gay after, for a very short period of time, they tried a relationship because they both love each other so much, but it didn't work out because it turns out it was just what everybody expected from them and not what they actually wanted. And in the present day, he and his husband bought the house right next door to Lucy. So they raised Maya together in this really cute, almost sitcom style blended family situation, which I just thought was so nice. You see a lot of content about how the single mom suffers, which, don't get me wrong, is often true. Like, it's tough out there, but it was cool, especially in a really lighthearted rom-com, to see a single mom who still manages to have a really strong support network around her. Nobody is rooting for her more in this book than the father of her child. Nobody is more protective of her because they're still best friends, even though it didn't work out. And it's just a really tender dynamic. You also get to know a bunch of the people at the station who were also lovely. I'm excited for more books in this universe because I feel like they will be very, very fun. But just the way that everything was sculpted together and the way that everybody was characterized, again, just made this a joy to read. I would strongly recommend, if you like romance and you're looking for something fun and lighthearted to kind of like take the edge off of whatever dumb thing is going on in your life right now, this could be perfect for that because it definitely was perfect for me. After that, unfortunately, riding that high, straight 6 feet under the ground, I had probably my biggest disappointment of the year so far, and that would be Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. This was on my public TBR on this channel for a long time before I picked it up, but we made it, we got there. And the premise of this is really simple. It's just a loose retelling of Macbeth, but from the perspective of a theoretically, historically accurate Lady Macbeth. She's much younger in this book than I think she is in the play. She's like a 16-year-old French girl, but that's what's going on. I'm just going to say off the jump, I am not a Shakespeare nut. I am not a Shakespeare enthusiast. So beyond a couple of extremely general statements about what I remember from Macbeth, because I did read it in high school, I'm not really going to be speaking about whether this is effective as a retelling. storytelling, just because I don't really have a lot of familiarity with the main source. But I ended up giving this 2.5 stars, which was way lower than I expected because I love Ava Reid. I mean, I guess this is only my third book by them, but I read both Juniper and Thorn and also A Study in Drowning before this, and I'm pretty sure I gave them both at the time 4.5 stars, but Juniper and Thorn especially, I feel like I've retconned in my head to being a 5-star book. The memory of that story has genuinely aged like the finest wine. So I was really excited about this. I picked it up, I think, upon release and just put off reading it for like a year. Maybe my subconscious knew, maybe I'm psychic and just some part of me was aware that it would disappoint me, so that's why I put it off for so long. But one thing that Ava always gets right, and the main reason why this book did not get a lower rating from me, is the prose and the atmosphere are still fantastic. I've always described Ava's writing as like a fractured fairy tale, but it really is the kind of thing that you could make like a whole ass mood board about. Clouds, but they're dark and stormy, and there's a cliff and there's an ocean underneath the cliff, and lightning is striking the cliff just so, and also there's a tower in the background that's covered in ivy, and maybe also something else, something darker than ivy. Like, it just all has that vibe, and I eat that up every single time. But it's not just the atmosphere, it's not just the settings, it's also how she writes like internal monologues within her characters. There's just this lusciousness to her prose, but it's always threaded with something that's a little bit dark. Like, this is my favorite quote from this book, and honestly, you don't really need context. She is so angry at herself for this, her silence. The abbey at Nioned had a book of saints in which all their various martyrdoms were accounted. Roseal remembers reading of one woman who was put to death for refusing to renounce her faith in God. She was burned alive at the stake. The book stated that she did not protest, did not even scream as the flames ate at her flesh. Roseal stole this book from the monk's library and brought it to her father. She was still foolish enough, then, to believe Rybeard had any interest in cultivating the mind of his bastard daughter. "What is the point of being martyred if you do not scream?" she asked. "Wouldn't it be thought that you do not care enough about your life to protest its end?" The Duke looked at her with tepid interest. "No worldly agony is greater than what our imaginations can conjure," he said. There was no need for this girl to scream. Everyone who looked on could imagine her pain. The pain is the protest. I just think that's sick. I love little flashback moments like that. So that's what I liked about this book. The writing was great because Ava's writing always works for me. It's also pretty short. The pacing's good. It never really feels like the story is dragging its feet. But dude, other than that, honestly, almost nothing else about the book worked for me. I'm gonna begin by talking about something, again, of which I know not, but I do remember something about the original Lady Macbeth, and I had seen some of the criticism going into this book that was by people who know a lot more about Shakespeare than I do, who were basically calling this book a character assassination. And honestly, I mean, from what I remember, I kind of agree, but maybe not from the same reasons as somebody who's like a really big fan of Shakespeare. Lady Macbeth, as I remember her from the play, is like an extremely cunning, bad bitch who low-key has no moral compass. Like, she's just kind of crazy. Like, she's kind of giving Jude from The Cruel Prince ascertain power at any cost, you know what I'm saying? Which is fascinating. The tiny fragments I had in my memory of reading this play in high school made me really excited to see what Ava would do with a character like that. Because I feel like the other books I've read by her usually have main characters that are pretty disenfranchised. Like, they don't have a lot of agency in their lives. And part of the narrative thread of Ava's books is reckoning with that and also restoring that agency, right? Like, that's always an important part of her stories. But I was interested to see what she would do with a character who is very different from any of that. And I think instead what you get in this book is just a watered down version of especially Juniper and Thorn, of what I think made that book great and that book really hit for me. I feel like a lot of the message of this book is almost identical to Juniper and Thorn thematically, straight up down to the man, because there's another love interest other than Macbeth who is introduced. And obviously I love that arc in Juniper and Thorn. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an extremely dark book. It deals with really sensitive topics, but I think it does so in a way I've never seen before as somebody who reads a lot of books about similar things. And it's really effective. Like, there's a scene in the last 10% of that book that I still think about all of the time. But in this book, that narrative is just, it's watered down, and it's watered down over the corpse of the original Lady Macbeth, which, like, I feel like I get it. I feel like I see the point that they were trying to make with how they reimagined Lady Macbeth's character, because don't get me wrong, I mean, this book has a lot of fantasy elements, but it's still based in real life. And in real life, Macbeth's bride probably would have been 16. She probably wouldn't have really known what was going on. It's not really super true to life that she would be able to continuously manipulate him like fucking Machiavelli. Lady Macbeth in this book is kind of smart. Like, she is kind of clever, but she's also not, because she's really young. She's like constantly taken off guard by the events of this book, and it kind of just ends up reading like another book about how women are like made toothless by society and have kind of just always been victimized. And there's also a choice with the very ending of this book, which I won't spoil for you in case you do want to read this that baffled me, that I feel like undermined a lot of the agency that Ava usually does try to give their main characters by the end of their books. And yeah, I mean, it really didn't work for me. Honestly, I probably should have given this 2 stars, but like after I finished it, I'm under the haze of really still enjoying Ava's writing, which probably gave it a buff, but that's okay. And I want to say that this would work better if the characters just had names that were not associated with anything that was entirely original, but I don't even think that's really true. I think I would still have a lot of the same problems with this book, but it would be a little bit better because, again, erasing Lady Macbeth, kind of the original baddest bitch in the West, if you asked me when I was 15, erasing her character to do this, I do think makes it especially bad, but again, I don't know if it would be like that much better, even if it had been retooled. Unfortunately, not a hit for me. You hate to see it. I am still excited to read A Fable for the End of the World, though, the like sapphic young adult dystopia novel that she released recently. That one sounds up my alley again, but unfortunately for now, we are only 2 for 3. Okay, after that, I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I made a vlog for this last month that has truly all of my thoughts if you haven't seen it. So I'm gonna try to be relatively quick with this book, especially since, you guessed it, the fucking sun is setting somehow. It's like 7:30 p.m. What you don't know is I actually had to refilm the first, I guess, 4 books if you count the Legendborn trilogy, because I lost the footage since my microphone died and it didn't tell me. So surprise, that's editing magic, dude. Think of all of the ways that I could be lying to you right now. Me when art is a lie and nothing is real. Anyways, let's move into Sunrise on the Reaping. Once again, I read that for a vlog, which also has spoilers, so you really do get my like raw, unfiltered opinions. But if somehow you don't know what this is, what it's about, this is the second Hunger Games prequel that Suzanne Collins has released. Really, I think it's the prequel that nobody expected to get. I mean, I kind of just assumed that she was over it. I assumed that she was done. But then in like the span of what couldn't have been more than 3 months, it felt like it was in the span of 3 months, this was announced and then released. This is Haymitch's story. This is Haymitch's prequel. You might think that you know what happened to him based on your lore knowledge from the rest of the trilogy, but dude, it might not be exactly what you think. Rapid fire FAQ. Do I need to read the original trilogy? Yes. Do I need to read Ballad? I would also say yes. Personally. I think you will get more out of this book if you have also read Ballad, but do you need to reread the original trilogy and or Ballad to read this book? That is completely up to you. I did not do a reread, and honestly, I think it made some parts of the story more surprising. I think it made some things hit harder because I was like remembering and re-crying about all of the things that made me sad about the original trilogy. But with that said, I also know that I definitely missed a lot of Easter eggs that I have since learned about. Almost everybody that you could possibly imagine that would have been alive during this book and is from the original trilogy makes an appearance at some point, and you really do get a lot of lore from that. And there are also some connections that I think you will make a lot easier if the original trilogy especially is like fresh in your mind, but you don't like need to reread them in order to enjoy this, I don't think. Can you just have watched the movies and then read this book as your first Hunger Games book? I wouldn't do that. I would go back and read the original series. I think there's a lot more content inside of that just because of the nature of film had to get scrapped and cut in order to make them into movies. So I think that you will get a lot out of reading the original series that will then translate into how much you get out of this. But that's just me, dude. I don't run your life. I don't make your decisions for you. Where does this book sit inside of my personal Hunger Games ranking? I think I am a Catching Fire, Hunger Games, probably then Sunrise on the Reaping, Mockingjay, Ballad, Andy. That is who I am, but I do love all of these books. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I mean, it did cause an entire emotional breakdown. Again, it's all documented. That's never coming off of the internet. If you're not already a massive fan of the series, I do think that you'll still get something out of this, but it's not gonna hit as hard for you if you're not a lifelong Hunger Games enjoyer like I am. And I think that being a lifelong Hunger Games enjoyer and looking for all of these Easter eggs and making all of these connections allowed for me to ignore some problems I do think that this book had, because I do think that especially on the front of characterization of characters that are not named Haymitch, you don't really get to know a lot of the other tributes very well, and I feel like leaving so much of that on the table kind of defangs a lot of the emotional impact of the actual games themselves. Haymitch also has a girlfriend who I think you hear about on like page 1, so this isn't a spoiler, and I don't think we got to know her particularly well either for how important she was as a figure in the book. Like, she's really more of an idea than she is a person. And as a Hunger Games enjoyer, as a Hunger Games enthusiast, I was still able to imprint upon all of these characters that I did not know. I was still able to end up absolutely crushed because, I mean, this book is very sad. I'm sure you know that. There's no way you don't know that this book is really sad. But I do think that it was harder in this book than it was in the original trilogy with characters like Rue, for example. But that was my main problem. And I do think that by a lot, it's the most significant issue issue that the book has, because the rest of it is really fucking cool. Thematically, I think it's incredibly prescient to where we are now. I talk a little bit about that in my video, and I stand by what I said. Low-key, I thought I was cooking. It was like 10 p.m. and I just cried for 2 hours before I filmed that, but the themes are great. The plot in general is fascinating all the way through. All of the characters that already existed going into that book didn't have the same problem as the newly introduced characters, in my opinion, and learning more about them was awesome, especially Hamish and Snow and the foil between them, and seeing how Plutarch develops into what we know him to be later in the original trilogy. Just the way that Suzanne was able to mold a prequel that feels like it was always destined to exist. Like there's no way that she knew she was going to be writing this in 2012, but with the way that everything connects so seamlessly, it kind of feels like she does. It kind of feels like this was just always on the menu, is always in her repertoire, and that's crazy. And that's what I mean by saying if you're already a big Hunger Games enthusiast, then this book will probably really hit for you like it did for me, because the payoff is just so good. I mean, it's also so bad, like it's really bad, but the book was just a treat. It was a little treat for kids like me. After that, I read The Rose Bargain, and this is a special edition, so I'll put like the normal cover on screen so you can know what it looks like. And this is what I was reading, really at like the peak of my long national nightmare, working on the video that you haven't seen yet. This is what I read to cope along with Yona of the Dawn. This book was described to me as like Bridgerton meets The Bachelor, but also meets fairies and magic. And that was honestly everything I needed to know to feel like this would be a fun time. And it was a fun time. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. The premise of this book takes place in this alternate universe version of England, where I think during the War of the Roses, let me check. Yeah, during the War of the Roses, a fairy queen appears out of the ether and is like, hey, Edward, would you like to win the war for free using my magical powers? Because if you do want to win the war, then I can just like telekinetically insta-kill the other guy that you're fighting, and then you'll be king. And wouldn't that be cool? And Edward obviously is like, yeah, that would be pretty cool. So he agrees to it. He like signs this imaginary, seemingly pretty open-ended bargain. The other guy drops dead, Edward gets crowned, and then not 24 hours later, he also drops dead because the fairy queen has actually been the one to take the throne through that bargain. Me, when I'm just a mere power-hungry mortal playing with magic beyond my comprehension, playing with things that I will never understand. That happens in like the 1400s, and 400 years pass. This book takes place in the mid-19th century, and at this point in this alternate version of England, they've closed their borders. They're basically like an isolationist state, and the rest of the world just kind of leaves them alone. They like let them be. Me, when I'm a mere mortal and I decide that powers beyond my comprehension are just not to be fucked with. But the fairy queen, who obviously is immortal, has been alive this entire time and ruling the kingdom and just living her life. And the way that this society works is every single person can do one magical bargain at any time in their life with the queen. And you can really ask for anything from like better farmland to lots of riches, the ability to play piano. The sky is kind of the limit, but in return, the queen always takes something. And what you agree to give up, like the price that you decide to pay, obviously is a pretty important part of the deal. If you're lucky, then you just have to pay something kind of irrelevant, like a pinky toe. But some people give up way more, not even really knowing what it is that they're giving up. And remember like 10 seconds ago when I said that you could take these deals at any point in your life? That is still, I think, true, but the big exception to this, at least in terms of tradition and custom, is all of the noble girls who are going to do the season thing and find their husbands. All of them go through and ceremoniously make their bargains on the first day of the season. And this book follows the second daughter of a family whose older sister, when it came time to make her bargain, the price she paid to make this bargain was all of her memories that have to do with this bargain. So she doesn't remember anything about what she asked for, but because of whatever it was, because of whatever happened to her, she was never the same. And also because of everything that happens, their family is like disgraced. They're low-key drowning in scandal because, I mean, nobody knows. It could have been anything. It could have even been like holding hands with a man. So Ivy's season is not looking great given the fact that her family is seen as like the scum on the bottom of society's shoe right now. But she still plans to go out for the season because she wants to make her bargain to undo what happened with her sister. Like that's really her only goal with all of this. But when she arrives at the castle, it's revealed that this will be the year that the son of the queen, who is also a fairy, this will be the year that he gets a wife. And in order to put your name in the running to become this man's wife, you have to agree to never marry anybody else ever again, even if you lose. Which for Ivy really isn't that big of a deal because, like, again, disgraced family, nobody not crusty and old was going to marry her anyways. So she's immediately down. 25 other girls also join, and the book becomes a dark and kind of evil, but also still young adult version of The Bachelor. There is a love triangle inside of this book. You have been warned. I thought that this was a fun time. Really no more, no less. It's kind of just on the tin, what you see is what you get. The type of fairy that you get in this book, with the exception of the Queen's son, is very like Cruel Prince-esque, just mean for the sake of it. I fuck with that. I like my fairies to be kind of creepy and mercurial and mean. It feels more in line with folklore and with the kind of fantasy stories that I enjoy. So I appreciated that the Queen is kind of just an insane person. Bachelor comparison, I will asterisk by saying that it does feel like when I give you that premise, it's going to be this massive competition. And I mean, it still is a competition. Like, they're doing interesting things, interesting events, but it's not really like the elimination style that you might be expecting. Low-key, it has a little bit more of a found family vibe to it between the girls than anything, which I did appreciate. Another asterisk, this book is pretty spicy for YA, which, like, I'm not the cops, I'm not gonna judge, do what you want, but I do feel like an educated viewer, especially if you are younger or like it makes you uncomfortable, you might wanna know. It's not like smut on the level of an adult romance novel, but it's way closer than probably anything else I feel like I've read that's shelved as YA. So just keep that in mind. There's only really like one scene towards the end. I'm gonna turn on a lamp because, like, as you can see, it's actively dark inside of here. 1 second. Okay, we're so back. Anyways, I'm trying to remember what it was I didn't like about this book because, I mean, it's not like I read it that long ago, but I did only give it 3.5 stars, which is not, I want to put out there, I feel like I always have to remind people this. That's not a bad rating, but it is lower than a book that I would confidently say that I enjoyed. Oh, the ending, the ending of this book is crazy. It's like, it's like crazy in a Lifetime movie way, where it is entertaining. It's like reading no stakes drama on Reddit that does not affect you, but it was also ridiculous. Like, it was not a watertight plot twist. It raises a lot of questions about the rest of the book that are really kind of impossible to answer. Oh, it's all coming back to me now. I also didn't love the protagonist, especially with the way that the love triangle was kind of handled by the book. I thought it was kind of ridiculous. Ridiculous is maybe just the defining quality for this entire experience. Some of the decisions that she would make, they weren't always it. They weren't always the optimal play. Which, do you have to make the optimal play when you're like an 18-year-old girl in the 1800s? No, but I don't know, man. Just a couple of brain cells to spare in between your thoughts about these men. It would really have gone a long way in a couple of scenes. Trigger warning, this is a series which I actually didn't know until I got to the end of this book, but I honestly do think I'll probably continue with this down the road when it eventually comes out. Just because, again, by rights, should any of this be happening? Probably not. Like, does it make sense? Not always. It really does not always. But it is interesting. Like, I am intrigued to see how everything continues to go to shit before it gets better. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, 3.5 stars. I mean, it's kind of empty calories, but like, sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes it's what you need to survive. Okay, second to last book. We're finally getting there. I have Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and this was the inaugural book club pick that we voted on in my Patreon for April. And unfortunately, even though I was really looking forward to this book because I love Frederick Bachman, kind of similar to how I love Ava Reed, but honestly, I feel like his books have an even higher average for me. This is my 5th book by him, and Beartown is one of my favorite contemporary books of all time. I also loved A Man Called Uva. I enjoyed the rest of the Beartown series, even when it got kind of repetitive. And this book had a lot of the sauce that I've come to expect from a Frederick Bachman book, but just delivered to me inside of a gravy boat that just did not hit quite as hard as his other work. This book is about a bank robbery that goes awry and turns into a hostage situation inside of a nearby apartment building when the bank robber realizes that that bank doesn't actually carry cash, they're digital only, and then the teller of the bank calls the police. So the robber runs and panics and takes hostage this group of, I think, like 8 people who just happen to be going to this showing at a nearby apartment complex. Like a lot of the rest of Frederick Bachman's works, the story is told asynchronously. You're getting the story of the investigation that is happening after the hostages are released, and the police are conducting all of these interviews, and they're trying to figure out what happened to the bank robber, who seems to have just vanished into thin air after everything happens. And you're also getting the story of the active hostage situation as it's happening, and then you're also getting the backstories of all of the people who are in the hostage situation. Some of these these backstories are given to you as dialogue that is happening during this crisis, but a lot of them you're getting as like traditional true flashbacks. So that's what's going on. It's just a zany contemporary situation that ends up almost a little bit as a mystery as you're trying to figure out what happened to this bank robber. I don't know if I said this yet. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars, which again is not a bad rating. There were a lot of things I liked about this book. I mean, something about the way that Frederick does endings just always does it for me. Like the last maybe 3 or 4 chapters of this book, I was crying. Like there were tears actively streaming down my face. And I really did come to appreciate almost the entire cast of this book. They were all wonderful. I mean, again, Frederick Bachman is great at making these imperfect and kind of annoying people into like actual living, breathing humans that you really feel a lot of sympathy for. But with that said, I don't think that all of these characters felt fully realized to me, which is weird because I feel like, especially in Beartown, there are characters in that book that don't even have names, and you see maybe like 7 paragraphs of them in the entire book, but you feel like you understand them to their core. So it's weird to me, and to what I remember of reading Beartown again, especially, that in this book with, I mean, it's still a large cast, but it's comparably, I think, much smaller. You have characters like Ro, who you kind of see act in accordance with trauma that you don't know exists until you get to the end of the book, but then you don't see like anything else about her. You don't really know how she got from point A to point B. You don't really know like where she goes from here. And I think with that, I felt like I was told a lot about people that I didn't find to be 100% believable. And again, the same way that I have in his other books, with some exceptions, obviously. I feel Zara was great. The therapist was great. Both cops were really good, but not everybody made it there for me. So I wasn't all the way invested, especially again at like maybe the halfway point, the 60% mark. This is the book by Frederick that has most reminded me that I read his books in translation, because Frederick's books almost always have some humor, like there's some kind of tongue-in-cheek dad style jokes that you get in every book. But this book is definitely a little bit sillier and lighthearted than the other books that I've read by him. And keep in mind, I mean, this is still Frederick Bachman. Like there are still some pretty serious themes inside of this book that maybe you should look into if you're worried. But the balance between being fun and lighthearted and like a serious exploration of themes is more slanted, I think, in this book towards being lighthearted and fun than it is in his other books. I also think that, back to feeling on a profound level, like this was something I was reading in translation, the politics of this book are good. It is, you know, banks bad. Banks can have a really deleterious impact on society as we know it and on our communities and on the people that we love. I mean, among other things. There's other stuff going on here, but there were just some moments in the politics of this book where it was like, I do not live in a country where I even kind of relate to you. And it's hard to describe exactly what I mean. And I think it's definitely also made worse by the era in which I am reading this book. But there were just a couple of moments politically that really took me out of what was going on because of how fundamentally unrelatable I found it. But with that said, it was actually kind of cool that I read this as the Patreon pick, because there were a couple of Swedish people who were able to like give perspective on the culture and the politics and also some of the jokes that didn't translate very well, which, like, by the way, insane to me that there are people watching my videos from places I have never been in my entire life. But that was really neat. I feel like having that extra context did make me like the book more. I ended up just giving it the rating I was originally going to give it anyways, but I feel like I understand it better now in a way that I probably wouldn't have if circumstances were different. So that was cool. One other thing actually that I haven't mentioned before I table this, I did like the twists in this book. None of the other Bachman books I've ever read really make any attempt at all to have a mystery, and this book does have a central mystery that is interesting, and I also think subverts your expectations in a way that you will find surprising. Or at least I did. I don't know. I didn't see it coming at all. So keep that in mind if you decide to pick it up. It's like a fun little bonus, I think, that you do get with this book. The final book that I read for this wrap up was In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This is also off of my spring TBR. Oh, dude, I finished this relatively recently and I still don't think I know how to talk about it. This book is about these 2 boys who are at boarding school in England right at the start of World War I. Their names are Henry Gaunt and Sidney Elwood, and their whole thing is that they're secretly in love with each other, but neither of them wants to admit it. They've been mutually pining for like the entirety of their teenage life, but for different reasons that are equally damning, neither of them are willing to confess their feelings, so they just kind of like saunter forwards in friendship throughout their school years. And they're both 17, they're like both right about to graduate when something happens between them that leaves Henry Gaunt in such a stupor that he decides that the only way to escape his feelings, the only way to not be like miserable all of the time about being in love with his best friend, is to enlist in World War I. So that's what he does. He decides to go to war. The two of them then write these beautiful letters to each other for a while, still not talking about their feelings, because why would they? Until eventually, not just Sydney, but also all of their friends from boarding school also enlist in World War I, and they also all go to war. What's gonna happen after that point? You could probably guess. You could probably guess a little bit about what's gonna happen. Not pictured for you, dear viewer, the like 20 minutes of me just rambling to myself, trying to figure out if I'm giving this book 5 stars, but honestly, I think I am. I think this does get 5 stars. It's just fantastic. The writing is fantastic. There's one quote in particular I want to read. Let me see if I can find it, because I didn't tab it because I'm stupid. Where are you? God, I mean, this isn't even what I was looking for, but here's one. It was spring of lower 6th, and Elwood was so in love with Gaunt that his thoughts ran wild with anger. Gaunt was woven into everything he read, saw, wrote, did, dreamt. Every poem had been written about him, every song composed for him, and Elwood could not scrape his mind clean of him, no matter how he tried. He thought perhaps all the pain would sour the love, but instead it drew him further in, as if he were Mark Antony falling on his own sword. And it was a magical thing to love someone so much. It was a feeling so strange and slippery, like a sheath of fabric cut from the sky. Like, that's just, it's so good, dude. Elwood smiled, and a sudden, dry bleakness spread over Gaunt's heart as he thought of Hercules and Hector, and all the heroes in myth who found happiness briefly, only for it not to be the end of the story. I honestly don't even really think that those two quotes capture the writing style of this book, but it's so well done. I don't even really know how to talk about what I liked about this book without spoiling it for you, so I think I'm just gonna hit you with the dude, just trust me. It's fantastic, because this really is, it's so good. It's such a good book if you like things that will fuck you up, if you like things that'll like beat you up like you're a punching bag and you're full of sand, and the person punching you just lost their job at the iron bar factory and has to go like train up so that way they can work with even heavier objects. It takes a particular kind of person to enjoy that experience as much as I do, but if that's you, then you're in for a time with this one. My experience of reading this book was really strange in a way that to tell you too much would be spoilers, but I so strongly expected it to go in a direction that it just did not go at all, and it ended up kind of being thematically about something else entirely. I don't know if this is a relatable experience to anybody else who has read this book. I mean, don't get it twisted, it's still extremely sad. Like, it's serious. I mean, it's a war story, right? It's a book about World War I. I mean, it's going to be fucking miserable. Like, I don't normally read war stories. For me, I find them really challenging because I already feel like I know that war bad. And sometimes with war stories, you get things like All Quiet on the Western Front. I'm actually not even talking about the book. I'm talking about the most recent film adaptation from, I think, 2022 that I believe was German. It was the winner of Best International Film at the Oscars that year. That movie is really interesting to me because on one hand, I think it does a marvelous job of really disturbing you with the juxtaposition of all of the beautiful cinematic shots with the reality of war. Like, that combination is very emotionally affecting. I think it's a big reason why so many people loved that movie. But for me, the reason why I still didn't like it very much is it was really just like watching a pain simulator of the main character, where you just watch this man go to war and then all of his friends die one by one by one. And then I think that he dies at the end of that movie. Sorry for spoiling it if you haven't seen it, but honestly, I don't even remember if I'm telling the truth. So really, who's to say? But you never really get emotionally invested in any of the characters as individuals because you don't fucking learn anything about them. They're just kind of fodder. So when you're watching it, you're sad, you're disgusted because what's happening is like theoretically sad, it's theoretically horrible, but the characters in the movie felt dehumanized not only by their circumstances, like not only by the fact that war does dehumanize people, but also by like the script itself and by the lack of interest that it felt the movie had in actually establishing them as people and as whole characters beyond just creatures to put through pain. I feel like a lot of war stories just walk a really thin line of ending up just as a pain simulator like that doesn't really have a tremendous amount of emotional depth beyond just war bad, and it's really horrible and awful that this happens to people. And I feel like this book just does like a way better job of actually making you care about these people, even when they're pretty minor, like even when they only get a few pages of content. It's still fucking brutal watching the war happen around them, but because they're humanized and because of just in general, again, the shape that the plot takes, the direction of the story, it's not just pain simulator. It's not pain without purpose. It's pain that creates these really interesting character moments where you explore how you could possibly deal with going through an experience like this. How do you cope with any of this happening? How do you move on? And questions like that give people in war situations, like these characters, it gives them back their humanity. And also, and extremely importantly to this book, it's all on the backdrop of this love story, right? This blossoming love story that unfortunately is made extremely complicated by the ongoing fucking war, and also by the fact that they're gay in like the 1910s. Just one of those things going on would be bad enough, but they really had to roll bad on both. It's also worth mentioning that the story is broken up by these little newspaper inserts. Hopefully you can see that. And a lot of them have these little like death rolls and obituary in memoriam paragraphs to describe people that passed away during the war. And according to the note in the back, which also just describes how insanely well researched this book was, some of those paragraphs are like directly lifted from actual boarding school student newspapers, which really just adds to the realism of this entire story, because I just think this book does such a good job of both reflecting the absolute tragedies of war, and especially of wars where so many of the soldiers are like teenagers, like they're really young, but also putting respect on their names and memorializing them as like whole real people. I mean, obviously I cried reading this book, mostly around the middle, I will say. Like the middle I think was the most dense cry period for me, but it was all pretty brutal. And again, I don't want to say anything that even kind of spoils the direction that the story takes if you're interested in reading it, but I just really enjoyed what we got thematically out of things just not really going according to what I expected personally when I was reading it. I don't know, man. If you know, you know, I guess, but great book. I'm sure I'll probably end up talking about this later this year at some point. Maybe when I'm a little bit less delusional with hunger, because low-key it's late. Me when I thought that this would be a fast video, and then it wasn't a fast video. That's the Newly Nova special right there. But anyways, thank you for watching. I hope that, you know, this was at least something to satiate you while you wait a couple more days for my big video. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, if you have any opinions. And that's really it. I feel like that's a wrap. Okay, I don't have anything else to say. Bye!